I was sending somebody in to buy some narcotics out of a house, and he was offered a young girl, a couple of them actually, and you could hear it on the wire. And so we get back out, and I said, "What's going on in there?" And he said, "Well, these guys are moving bodies too, and they're working for the cartel on this side. They're moving bodies." And that's when he explained the whole thing to me. They basically pick up the people, they take their cell phones, they take them to a hotel, and then they demand more money from the families. At that time, $5,000-$6,000. But all the kids and the girls, especially, and the women would be forced into prostitution. And all of a sudden, the dope didn't really mean anything to me.
Ben, thank you for being here today. Your law enforcement career spans 20 years with 3 different law enforcement agencies: the Chula Vista Police Department, the Sycuan Tribal Police Department, and the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. You started your law enforcement career with the Chula Vista Police Department in November of 1993. You were promoted to corporal in January of 1999. Later that year, you suffered an injury during a fight, and you were unable to return to full unrestricted duty within the time limits established by the Chula Vista Police Department. You subsequently separated from the agency in August of 2000. In October of 2010, you returned to law enforcement with the Sycuan Tribal Police Department. You left that agency in July of 2012 to pursue a career with the San Diego County Sheriff's Office. You started with the San Diego County Sheriff's Office later that same month. You spent most of your career with the Sheriff's Office as a detective assigned to special investigations. Your assignments with that unit included Border Crime Suppression Team, Outlaw Motorcycle Gangs, Narcotics Task Force Team, and the Marijuana Enforcement Team. You were promoted to sergeant in March of 2021 and returned to patrol as a shift supervisor. After less than a year, you were assigned to supervise the Poway Criminal Apprehension Team. You retired from the Sheriff's Department in May of 2023. Ben, thank you for agreeing to share your story today.
Absolutely.
So what was your childhood like?
Grew up in Southern California, different places for the most part. My parents were married till I was about 4. They'd moved up to the Bay Area. My dad was a probation officer. When my parents split up, my mom came down to San Diego, and then we bounced between San Diego, Redondo Beach, Huntington Beach, those areas. She remarried, and that lasted about 7 years, and then she remarried again, brought us back down to San Diego. Most of the time I was probably, the stepdads were good men, but not, didn't really have that father figure. So I think I was always kind of trying to look for that. Maybe it made me a little more driven than probably most kids would have been. Started working when I was 13, throwing papers on and cleaning house, whatever it took, whatever I could make money at, detailing cars, working in the orange groves in San Diego County. And then just wanted to get to college and get out.
So what made you decide to become a police officer?
Well, I was thinking back, as far as I can think back, your earliest memories, I think I have one around 2 or 3, you can think back when you're really little. And I can remember wanting to be a cop then. So it never left me. The only thing that happened is when I was in end of high school, the church I was involved in, I felt that maybe it's more important for me to be involved in ministry of some sort and work with kids. So I decided to be a youth pastor. Went to college for that, went out to be a youth pastor, met my wife doing that. Everything was great, but it was just not a good fit. I wanted to be in law enforcement. And so I started applying, late 91. Found kind of the hardest time I think in history to try and get a job as a law enforcement police officer. But I remember taking tests with 1,200 cops, and they would tell me they had 6 spots open.
Wow.
Sometimes I'd be on a list, make it all the way up to the top 5, but they didn't have money to hire. So I tested from Anaheim, Orange County, Long Beach, all the way down to San Diego, all the agencies I could in San Diego County, and first one that picked me up was Chula Vista. There were 1,200 of us that tested, and they picked up 12, and I was probably number 12, but at least I got in.
So what's the Chula Vista Police Department like? How big is it?
At the time, they were around I don't know, I think around 220. They're much larger now. It was a great little department. It was actually the second largest city in San Diego County at the time. And they're about 7 miles from the border. And Rick Emerson was the chief. He did a fantastic job in that department. He had come in, cleaned up some things. There were some issues that had to be taken care of. He had come in, and he was the one that hired me, and I really liked Rick. And it was one of those things, again, I was very driven for approval, looking for some sort of affirmation in life, basically the thing I grew up with. And so I guess that made me a little more driven, so I'd work harder, and the more approval you get, the harder you work. So my thing was get as many arrests as I could, get out there as much, learn as much as I could. Kind of started falling into narcotics, and that particular department was just a great place to start, because you went right to the streets, and there was plenty to learn from, being 7 miles from the border.
So when you get hired by them, how long is it before you go to the academy, and was it a commuter academy, or did you live there? Your
first day you're hired, you're basically, you have your orientation, and then next day you're at the academy day one.
Wow.
So you're wearing a suit, you're at the academy. It was a commuter academy. However, my wife and I had a little apartment right next to the academy, so I would just walk over. And you just Monday through Friday. It really wasn't that difficult. Wow. A lot of running, a lot of exercise, paramilitary back then, where they could yell at you and cuss you out and make you do push-ups. I think we did push-ups every hour that you're there. You had to do 26 push-ups because we were 26th Academy. But it was a good academy. It stretched you, but it really wasn't difficult. You just had to work hard.
So you show up at your department for your first day on the road. Do you remember what that's like, or at least maybe that first week, or is there a specific memory when you started?
They had an interesting thing at the academy. I don't think they do it anymore. Basically, you went to the academy for 6 weeks, then you got sworn in, and then they put you in a car for 2 weeks with an FTO. So, to be quite honest, we had no business being out there, and we're lucky we didn't get someone else hurt. But it was just to kind of get you used to the work, and then you go back to the academy, and then back out for 2 weeks, and then back to the academy and finish it. First 2 weeks, fortunately, I was with an FTO named Kevin Pike, who was a very nice guy. He wasn't yelling and screaming at me and making me walk around the streets trying to find out where I am. And basically, you just keep quiet, do the job. But I remember when the shift was over, I couldn't believe it was already over. It was one of those things where I would have stayed 24 or 48 hours. I loved it.
Yeah, for sure. So you're kind of doing this back and forth thing. You finish the academy, you end up at your agency at Chula Vista, and then you actually start I don't know, for lack of a better term, a more formalized field training program. How long does that last?
Yes, we did, and I think it was about 6 months.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
It might have been 4 to 6 months. Okay. It was the last phase of the field training program. You have 1 month where your FTO is wearing civilian clothes, and you're just the cop, and they're shadowing you to make sure you pass. So it might have been about 4 months. I don't remember.
So I want to kind of, not necessarily fast forward, but I think this is a good opportunity to kind of give an overview of your law enforcement career, kind of that 30,000 foot perspective, not just at Chula Vista, but at each of the agencies that you worked at, and kind of a timeline and the assignments that you found yourself in over the next 20 years. Put together 20 years.
Right. Well, I had to take 10 years off because of that injury, unfortunately. But when I was at Chula Vista, I had kind of found a little niche that I'd fallen into with the Alcoholic Beverage Control state agency. They were giving grant funding. And I developed a program, and the chief basically gave me carte blanche, run it however you want. And so that was my first detective assignment, though I wasn't technically a detective. And at one point we had about 20 detectives going out into the bars, and we had a pretty big case. There was a lot of prostitution and different things happening in these bars that service the military personnel in San Diego County. And we worked that and had some tremendous results. But because of that, I was asked to kind of replicate that program into a training. And so I started doing some training up and down the state for ABC. I would teach at their conventions, talk about how we run our program and the grant funding. And then that led into me teaching at the police academy. So even though I'd been injured, I continued doing some training for a while. And then eventually I had to start some companies and, to pay the bills, and I had to let all that stuff go. But when I got back into law enforcement again, I still ran my own private investigation company, and then was working at the Indian reservation, which they were very good in terms of just letting me do both at the same time. They didn't have any issues with that. It was nice to be in a uniform again, but it was also very limiting in terms of what involvement you can get. And then one person asked me to call somebody, and I called that person who said, why are you not putting him for us at the sheriff's department? We're hiring. So I didn't realize I could go back into law enforcement, so I got some things squared away and found out I could. And so, I think from the day I applied to the day I was in uniform was 4 months. Wow. The background just went right through quickly, and got started at the sheriff's department, and that was just a dream come true.
So going back to Chula Vista, talk a little bit in more detail, if you can, about why you had to leave that agency. Specifically, how did you get injured, and why were you put in the position of having to actually leave?
It was an interesting situation. Essentially, when you make corporal, they called it agent, but when you made corporal and you got those stripes, you had to go back to patrol as an FTO, which no problem. I enjoyed it, had a great time. After 1 year, you get your desk and you end up back in investigations. So I was within 2 months of getting the desk and getting put back there, and the corporal doesn't have a beat. They just kind of wander the city for the most part. And that particular night, I was coming in, and I was asked if I would just clear a call that was on screen on the way back to the station. 2 brothers fighting. I said, no problem. I showed up, and the guy walks out of the car and he says, why don't you just arrest me right now? He's walking up to my police car, and I said, no, I don't want to arrest anybody. I want to get off work here in a few minutes. What's your problem? And he pulls a beer can out of his pocket. It was a Budweiser. And we used to have what's called the BRI, or Bud-related incident. Every time there'd be some fight or blood on the ground or something, you'd find these empty Budweiser cans. So it was kind of a joke, but it also kind of bothered me because I didn't see him pulling the can out of the pocket. It could have been a gun, it could have been something different. So I realized my mind wasn't in it right. And essentially he said his brother and him were fighting. His brother was in his apartment and won't let him in his apartment. I asked him if his brother lived there. He said no. I said, do you want him out? He said yes. So backup arrived. I told backup, all right, hang out with brother. I'm going to go tell the other brother to get out of the apartment. So I went up there. One thing led to another. Next, we're in a big knockdown, drag out fight. And fortunately, another police officer had heard the radio traffic. He came to cover me. And that became very important in the end here. And so he comes up to the apartment while I'm fighting this guy. And of course, I'd called for cover at this point. And he comes up, and as soon as he gets in, then I see this other guy with no shirt, the original guy, no shirt, but he's all wet. I can figure, what is that about? And then I see the other police officer was supposed to be holding him or standing by with him, is all disheveled and everything, and kind of start putting it all together. Something's wrong. And so Pat, the cover officer, and this guy get in a fight. So they're fighting, and this guy's trying to grab Pat's gun, and it's getting pretty ugly. So eventually I'm punching this guy in the head, which ends up screwing up my wrist. This guy finally gets out to where we can cuff him up. Then we take the other guy and started using pepper spray on the other guy, and he'd already been a whole can of pepper spray. That's why he was wet. I happened to have some foam pepper spray. It was something they were trying out, so I tried that on him, and it worked. I don't know if it was that and a combination of other things, I'm not sure, but it worked. We get him in custody. Got to take both brothers to the hospital, and while I'm there, I noticed my wrist is just getting numb and I can't move it. I'm not losing feeling in it and stuff. So I had them look at it, and it just took months for the city to agree to get to a doctor that would do something. The doctor looked at it, and it was a torn lunate scaphoid ligament, and the scaphoid was kind of falling down, and he said basically I was going to really screw things up with my thumb and all that. So he did a surgery, put it all back together, put pins in, waited a few months, did another surgery, took everything apart again. Very painful surgery, but very successful. But I literally couldn't even move my wrist. And this was, we're coming up on 1 year, and they had a rule that you had 1 year to be fit for duty or you were out, which was kind of weird because it wasn't being enforced, but all of a sudden they started enforcing it. It's kind of bad timing on my part, I guess. I think we could have beat this. I think the chief was on my side. He was gracious. He asked if I wanted to fight with this, and I was just afraid. I had 3 kids, and I didn't want to get in a fight and then all of a sudden not have a job and my wife not working, and I panicked. I said, well, no, I guess I don't know what to do, so I didn't want to fight it. And then also our union said they were going to sue me because getting unfair treatment, which was kind of weird. So that was the union president who told me that. And so I said, well, I'm not going to play these games. So I just didn't want to be caught in the middle with the family. So I just, I drug it out as long as I could. And then eventually the city said I had to go. So I didn't even get the full year. So, and I had to leave.
So how long did you have with Chula Vista before you left?
About 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then you end up with the tribal police.
Right.
Brief period of time, but...
Yeah. And in that 10 years, I kept in touch with some of my friends who were good, still involved in law enforcement. And it was very hard. It never went away. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd see a traffic stop and just want to be there. It was very difficult being away. So when the opportunity came up, go to Sycuan, I was kind of not really wanting to, but at the same time, it just kind of brought me back into that community. And I knew the guys that were working there. They were retired from other agencies. So that's why I took the opportunity and did it.
Short period of time there, though, because
Yes.
then you get the phone call to go to San Diego County, and that's
Yes.
really where you thrive and
Right.
kind of have the best time of your law enforcement career.
Right. I had grown up in a small town called Palma Valley out in the country. Not grown up. I'd been there in high school, I should say. And my mom and stepdad owned a ranch out there. And I was, there was a resident deputy named Don Continelli. The guy was just, I think he won the police Olympics many years for bench press and stuff.
Wow.
The guy was just, he was that guy that everybody looks at and just wants to be like, at least I did as a kid, when I was in high school and everything. And Don handled every call by himself, never needed backup. He had a dog if he needed it, but he was just that guy. You called him at home when you needed a police officer, and he took care of it. And so I'd always thought, man, someday I want to work at the San Diego Sheriff's Department. That would be just a dream come true. Mm-hmm. And I was in process with the Sheriff's Department when Chula Vista offered the job, but things were so tenuous back in those days. I didn't want to say no to one and might not get the other one. So that's why I ended up not going to the Sheriff's Department back in '93. But so when I was able to get on with the Sheriff's Department, I was pretty excited about that because in San Diego County, they have a huge budget, and the resources and the helicopters and the firefighting stuff and all the different things they have and the resources they have are just tremendous. The opportunities to work different places and do different assignments. So I was very excited to get that job and get that offer.
So you never had to go back to the academy for either of those agencies?
I didn't have to for Sycuan.
Okay.
But I had to get my post recertified because I had an advanced post, which was as high as you could get anyways. Okay. And they said they would bring me in with the advanced post, top step deputy. So I didn't have to work my way up or anything. I just had to get the post recertified. So I didn't want anybody to know I was doing this, but I would sneak away on the weekends. I would drive 5.5 hours to this city college because that was the next class that was available. I would stay the weekend there, go to classes, and I'd drive 5.5 to 7 hours through LA traffic back home, and then I'd go work all night at Sycuan that same night. Man, I did that for 9 weeks and took the test, got my post certification back up to speed and everything. And and then as soon as that was done, I finished that in April. They finished my background. I was in July.
And then how long do you have to spend in a training program with San Diego County before you're turned loose on your own?
That was a matter of weeks. Sure. I think they had me, gosh, I want to say like 5 or 6 weeks. Wasn't much at all. It was just making sure I understood how their systems work, their computers, the radio talk, those things.
So how long do you actually, with San Diego County, spend in patrol before you transition into an investigator position?
Normally it would be several years, quite a few years. They kind of looked favorably on my prior investigation experience, and there was a team they were putting together that was involved in what was called intelligence-led policing, and it was a new way of doing police work at the time, and they wanted the whole department to buy in on that. So they put a team together where I think there were 7 of us, or that might have been 12 of us actually. But we had this big team, and we had an analyst, and we did intelligence-led policing, and much to my surprise, it worked. And basically you use the analyst and use data to define where the problems are and who the individuals are rather than the problem areas, and you go after these individuals. And so we did a lot of fourth waiver searches, a lot of parole searches, things like that. And through they call it ILP, you're kind of getting your name out there by all the stuff that you're doing, and you also go to other cities, and you may work for a month in another city for another department. And just help, the sheriff's department, because the sheriff's department had jurisdiction over the entire county, no matter what city you're in. It might be different than it is here. And so we would just go to all these different cities and do this stuff. And after 13 months, pretty much everybody got to go wherever they wanted after that. It was just, some people would promote. There was only one other person that had gone to special investigations, and he had gone a few months before me. And so I just put in for it, and I was accepted, and I was able to get over there.
So when you look at your career, your law enforcement career at the 3 different agencies, is there a specific, because you did spend some time in patrol pushing a squad around, is there a specific traffic stop that stands out in your mind as being unusual or maybe stressful?
There's a lot of them. That I think one where I made the biggest mistake that I always kind of regretted was a radio call, and I was I didn't have a beat that night, and it was pouring rain. It was the hardest rain I'd ever worked in, and I never put on pants. I mean, nobody puts the rain pants on, but I was so soaked we just had to, First time I'd ever put them on. So I'm wearing this rain suit, and happened to be right in this area where a radio call came out of an ex-husband at a house with a gun. And so my thought was, well, I'll just park, black the car out, and it was a very bad area in Chula Vista. In fact, I think it was even dirt roads part of the area where this was. So a really rough area by the river bottom. So I pull over, blacked out the car, and I'm just leaving it there and waiting for recovery units to get there, because I'm not going to go looking for this guy. So I'm just standing there waiting about a half a block away from where this incident had occurred, around the corner, and I'm standing outside in the pouring rain. I see a guy walking, and I'm like, shoot, that matches the description. Black male adult, heavy set, gun. And he comes walking up, and I say, hey, he's surprised. I surprised him when I saw him, so I drew down on him, and I said, listen, I need you to get over here and put your hands on the car. Well, there had been some incident in the media. I think it was Border Patrol's turn this time, where they'd done something wrong or used the flashlights incorrectly or whatever it was. There had recently been an incident where, like the Rodney King incident, to where we were all kind of on edge. So I get the guy, he's got his hands on the hood of the car, and I've got my gun in this hand, and I'm standing like this. And then because of that incident, my mind, I'm thinking more, what's public's perception than I am I going to be safe? And so I made the mistake of holstering my gun. I had a level 3 holster, so they don't come out easy. Holstered the gun, and I told the guy, he says, yeah, hey, sorry about this. We got a call of a man with a gun. You match the description, and so I just need to, I might have you wait here until my cover unit comes. And without even a full second goes by, he has that gun out. And he just reached right in. It came right out quicker than I could even begin to get mine out. And the first reaction I had, the only reaction I could do, was grab the gun and then get my gun out. And fortunately, I don't know if it's from the alcohol or the rain or whatever happened, but as soon as I grabbed the gun as it was coming out, towards me. I grabbed it and held it down, then got my gun out and put it up to his head. He gave up. He then begged me not to shoot him. And of course it didn't, but it really bothered me that I let the whims of society and what people think of us almost take my life. And I had 3 kids at the time, wife's at home with the 3 kids, and I thought, I just couldn't believe how stupid that was. And I've done plenty of stupid things. I've made mistakes, but when you're done and you look back on it, you think, wow, I really screwed that one up. And that one just always stuck with me, always bothered me.
So I think you articulated it, but so what would you have done? What do you think you would have done differently if you had the opportunity to do that again?
I would have stuck with my training.
Yeah.
Kept my weapon drawn on them until cover unit arrived, and they were done a full pedestrian hot stop. I mean, that's what we were trained to do. There was no, it's not a question, it's not an issue, there's nothing wrong with it, but again, it was a mistake I made.
So is there an incident with your time at the county sheriff's office that really sticks with you and maybe had an impact on you for the rest of your career and even still today?
There were a couple. I would say one of them, there was one actually at Chula Vista. I mean, if you want to go back real quick, there was I was on the gang unit with my good friend, still good friend, Eric Dunberg, and I were there, and I think he was driving that day, and we were eating our carne asada burritos, best burritos in the world down there. We're eating our carne asada burritos, just kind of hanging out, typical gang unit stuff, and the call comes out of an active shooter at a party. And so we start flying down the street. I think we were first ones on scene, and we went in, obviously, went in there, neutralized the situation. The shooter had given up. He was a young kid, actually, and got him all in custody and everything. And I went back out because I had stepped over a dead guy. Went back out there, and there was a guy being on the gang, I could tell by his tattoos what gang he was with and everything, and started doing CPR on him. And I remember his wife was over me, and she's crying and screaming, and she's holding her baby, about 1-year-old. And I'm just doing CPR, trying to get back, and there's just holes in him. I'm like, this guy's not gonna make it, But I'm giving it the best I could. Medic arrives, medic takes over. I go into the house, and they got the guy in custody, and then they got this other guy there. And that guy was Juan. I knew his name was Juan because the wife kept crying for his name, Juan. So then I go inside, and this other guy's there. Later find out his name's Peter, and he's not talking. And they're like, well, what? They're trying to get stuff out of him. And then we realized he'd been shot in the head. But the bullet was inside. It didn't have an exit wound or anything. It was kind of a weird situation. And so we get him into the ambulance. I hop in the ambulance. He's going sideways. So I'm thinking, well, it's going to be, I'll get the dying declaration, So I'm trying to get he can't talk. I'm trying to get the dying declaration by him squeezing my hand, yes or no. I go through his wallet, get his name. I find a picture, a little kid, some kids in there. I think it was 1 or 2 kids. So I show him the kids. I said, these are your kids. He nods yes or whatever. And I said, all right, you need to stay alive for these kids, because he was going down. And so we had a long drive to the trauma unit in the ambulance, but he'd start going, his vitals were going down, he was going out. And I kind of felt like I needed to pray for him, which was unusual. So I did. I would just pray for him. And every time I pray for him, he would do better. So I'm like, oh, this is, well, I guess I'll just keep praying for the guy. So I prayed for him all the way to the hospital, and then they took him, of course, going to the thing. And I think I got partway in there, and once they get in there and they're doing all the surgeries, I step out. I wasn't supposed to be in there anyway. I step out, and I walk out to the hallway, and I see, I'm standing there, and I'm just kind of trying to get my head around all this that's gone on. And this lady comes running up to me, and she said, she goes, hi, I'm here, where, my son Peter, is he here? And I said, yeah, he's here. What's he? And the doctors were saying he's going to die. There's no way. I said, listen, you need to just, be strong, be there. Peter's trying. The doctors are doing everything they can right now. But in my mind, I'm thinking, he's not going to make it. She goes, oh, no, I can't, And she says, okay, well, where's his brother Juan? And nobody told her. And that's when it all clicked.
Wow.
She goes, Juan was at the party. I don't know where Juan is. Nobody can tell me where he is. Where's his brother Juan? And so I told her, and she just falls onto me, just bawling and crying. So I carried her into they had a little chapel. I carried her over to the chapel, and her husband was there, and found out she was a real strong Christian woman. And so we just prayed together, and she kept praying and everything, and the guy made a miraculous recovery. Everything about perfectly fine. He had speech therapy for a while, but made a recovery and anything. And that one, I stayed in touch with her for a couple years, and that was a I don't know why that one really stuck with me. It was just seeing a mom so distraught like that. And then at the sheriff's department, there were two that kind of stuck out. And it seems I notice it every Christmas. I get a little agitated on one of them. And I also notice it with my own grandkids too. We had a call on the 24th of a military family, because we had military housing. Guy, he was a black guy, and his wife was also maybe light-skinned black. And the call came out, non-breather, 2-year-old. So we all rush over there, and it was the cutest little baby. He had curly hair, and it was kind of red hair, and he was light-skinned, just cutest little guy. He was just gone. Medics couldn't do anything, so they left him there. And this is New Year's Eve, or New Year's Day. And not New Year's, I'm sorry. It was the day before Christmas Eve. So we're sitting with this baby, and then the mom's holding the baby. We had to wait 2.5 hours for the coroner to get there and the homicide team to show up. And so the mom and the dad have the baby, and the dad was just so upset. And later find out he'd taken the baby to Balboa Hospital, the military hospital. They said, just take him home, he'll be fine, let him get some rest. Well, he had a respiratory infection, and so the dad lays down with him. Dad falls asleep, wakes up, and he's dead, a little baby. And it was so hard, 2 of the cops couldn't even stay in the room. So I was one of the ones that had to stay there, stay in there. And then Dad's kicking holes in the wall, and then eventually he throws the Christmas tree over, and all the presents under the tree were for this little baby. He says, you got to get these out of here, and he starts them. So we had to take all the Christmas presents for the little baby out. And that one really messed me up. That was hard. And I think even to this day with my grandkids, when they sleep or they stay over at our house, I always check on them. I'm scared, The next morning, it's Christmas Day. And this was my first year in patrol over there at the sheriff's department. First thing in the morning, we get a call of a SIDS baby, 3 weeks old. So we go racing over there. Baby's and I didn't know at the time the SIDS often bleed. So there was lots of blood, and it was horrible. But, fortunately, the fire department took the baby and just kept doing CPR, even though there's no way the baby was alive. And I just remember the horror in that poor couple, this young couple, and what they were going through. And then the next day after Christmas, a guy fairly wealthy, but he wasn't trained to fly airplanes correctly. He didn't have the proper training. Had his wife, him, and his daughter in the airplane, and their cat, and they left one airport just west of us. He went up. He got disoriented in the clouds, went into a flat spin, and landed in kind of a mountainous terrain area on my beat. And so we had to get out there. They had special trucks that got us out to the wreck, the plane crash. And the weird thing about it is the plane hit, the canopy bounced off, and then it slid down the hill and stopped. And everybody in the plane was fine. There was no blood, nothing. Everybody was fine. So we get there, and the wife, the way her body had fallen, her arms were around the guy, which was really weird. And the girl looked exactly like my daughter, same age as my daughter and everything, but all I could see I couldn't see her face. So I had to check. I don't know, it just gets in your head. So I gently lifted her head back, and all her teeth fell out. And I was just like, And we were there, I can't remember if the coroner made it that day or not. I think they did. I think they made it that day. And then I had to go back the next day and wait for him. But it was just, in 3 days, you got, 5 bodies, and it was just, right at Christmas. I don't know why, it just kind of hits me a little bit. But the hardest scene was a couple months before that. I was having lunch, and on what was normally my beat, I happened to have to cover the city next to my beat, because we had a contract with them, we had minimum, so I'm covering that city. But I hear, they're gonna try to arrest this guy. One of the sex crimes detectives was gonna arrest this guy, and they brought the street team out, So the street team was there, and he didn't want any, I remember specifically, they didn't want anybody else in the area. I don't know, maybe they didn't want to spook the guy or what, I don't know. So people were staying out of the area. So I'm next city over, so I'm listening to it. And then all of a sudden, you start hearing shots fired, deputy down. We got 2 deputies down now. We need a rescue. And so, you're driving as fast as you can drive. That's the ultimate call. And they were saying it was high power rifle fire, and that we couldn't get into, don't come a certain way. We had to come in a different way. And I remember there was a deputy who's since passed away, just a good friend of mine at the time. Larry Hammers had done 20 plus years as a fire captain, and he had about 8 years law enforcement experience. We were same beat, good friends. He's a little bit older. And we get there, and everybody, there wasn't enough urgency. And I didn't know why, and it kind of bothered me. I think people were just kind of like waiting for direction or something. And Larry was like, and I was like, why isn't anybody doing anything? And Larry's like, calm down, kid. And he had a camera on. And back then we didn't have body worn cameras, but he had his own camera. So he had it rolling. So he and I run down to the house. All I had was a shotgun. I didn't even have my rifle yet. And so all I had was a shotgun. He had his shotgun. We run down to the house, and we get there. And you can't believe how much everything's blown up, and it's just crazy. And so Larry goes around the other side of the door and starts putting together a rescue. I go to this side of the whole situation, and I was going to do cover. So if the guy came out of the place or he started shooting at us all again, I was going to fire back into the house. And so they're putting all the rescue together, and they're doing this, and it was going quick. It wasn't, this long drawn out time, but I remember seeing the detective, Ollie Perez, wearing a kind of a striped shirt, I think, but it completely 100% soaked in blood. And I was just staring at him like, please, let me see a breath. And it's real slow breaths. And it was so upset. I didn't even know the guy, but it just was so upsetting seeing that. And I didn't know where the other deputy was, and I didn't understand everything. And so they're upstairs. So they do the rescue, and while they're doing the rescue, the guy fires around. So I fire back into the house, and we get him rescued. And then the hardest part about it is I reload, got back on the house, and I see the door opening. And I'm thinking, oh, this is it. This guy's paying for it. And he puts 2 hands out. And the hardest thing in the world was not to pull that trigger. And I knew that shotgun would have I knew exactly what I had in there, the slug, the whole thing. It wasn't just me. It was other deputies also felt the same thing. It was the hardest thing in the world not to shoot that guy. And we probably could have justified it, but no, we didn't. We ended up getting him in custody. Ollie had shot him 3 times, yet he was still firing. He'd been firing an M1 Grand. He'd been laying in wait for the detective. And as soon as the detective got there, he fired the M1 Grand. And obviously it just went right through Ollie's vest and everything. And Ollie miraculously lived. Amazing guy, absolute amazing story. But I think it was 37 days on the department at that point. Oh. And that that's every September 25th. I have to get a call from a couple guys, and first few years we all met, for drinks, as cops do. And then after that, it just got to be phone calls. But to this day, that was 2012, we still call each other and check in with each other. It's an emotional day. That was a tough one.
Was there a second deputy that was shot?
Yeah, and that was hard to see too. That was Craig Johnson. He was the sergeant of the street team, and his was a miracle. His arm was it was horrible to see. It was all just open flesh, and he's shot here, he'd shot somewhere else. And the weird thing is they didn't get the bullet, but eventually, a couple months later, the bullet came out of his skin, and he made it into a cross, because there's no way he should have survived the shooting. There's just, nobody can figure that one out, how that bullet didn't do what it was supposed to do. I don't know all the story on it, but Craig, that sergeant, and I kept in touch with him. We'd done some motorcycle rides, stuff. He's a great guy, but those things don't go without a lot of screwed up
Sure.
Screwed up nights and days and thoughts, situations like that.
So my impression from the outside looking in, California seems to be a pretty progressive state when it comes to law enforcement and training and taking care of their people. When you're involved in all of these incidents, is there any type of mental care, checking in with you? Is it just offered if you want it and that's it, or?
No, you're required to go to a debrief,
Okay.
which is very helpful, and that's the next day. And they have peer counselors, and the peer counselor that was assigned to me had been in multiple shootings.
Cool.
The homicide sergeant that interviewed me had been involved in 3 shootings, and the support was unbelievable. I've seen what other departments go through, where they sequester you and say, you go there, don't you dare talk to another person, and all that kind of stuff, and that's very damaging. Our department was the opposite. It was unbelievable the way they took care of us. And then, of course, you're required to go to your counseling and everything, but you just want to get through that really quick, check the box, get back out there.
Yeah.
So, I did that. I needed to be around the team as quick as I could. So last thing I wanted was, more than my 3 days or whatever it was you had to take. So I went through, got out. I remember on my days off, wife and I took a drive up the coast, and I was just silent. You're just processing, you just have to have some quiet time. So I think we spent a night up in a little north of where we live and just got away for a bit. But yeah, the department did a good job. And then after that, there's also another counseling thing you have to go to up in the mountains, and they bring in people from different departments that have all been involved in different shootings, and then everybody compares notes for a weekend. And that was really good. I learned a lot about drinking, the effects of alcohol and the drugs, the Ambien, all those kind of things. You learn a lot about that. And that's very important because a lot of cops have to end up going to that kind of stuff, and it causes so much more damage in the end.
Wow, that's incredible that they do that much for you. I mean, guys I've talked to, it's, you good? Yeah, and then that's, and that's the extent of it.
Yeah, I mean, in the 90s, I pulled a guy out of a house that had burned off everything in his face, everything on his body was burned off, and the only thing left over was tennis shoes, and I get done with the call, and his skin's all over my uniform, and watch commander say, "Why don't you go change?" And he goes, "You good?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm good." And if you were to say you weren't, then oh boy, your career is screwed up, man. So this was you come forward about 15 years, things had changed a lot, and for the better.
So you end up at San Diego County, end up going to the Special Investigations Unit,
right?
And share what you're comfortable sharing with some of the assignments that you had and some of the things you did and saw.
Immediately, the first place I was sent to was the Border Crime Suppression Team. There's several units within Special Investigations. It's very competitive and tough to get in there. And fortunately, I got in. Somebody put in a good word for me is basically what happened, I think. And once I got in, it's a lot of fun. I felt like, again, I had to prove myself, prove my worth. So I remember getting in there and working as hard as I could, trying to develop informants, develop cases, and put things together. And the camaraderie of the team was unlike anything, we'd ever worked in, or I'd ever worked in before. Once you're in the team, and once you're locked in, and you're working hard and pulling the results, it's amazing. We had, 4 or 5 Border Patrol agents on the team, one guy from HSI, maybe 2, and then about 6 or 7 sheriff deputies and a sergeant. And I couldn't even begin to tell you. I mean, if you had a case that was less than 25 pounds, you just kind of laughed. I mean, obviously I did buys for a pound or 2, trying to get into places, but you learn about the underworld. You learn about the Mexican cartels. Basically, we were trying to go after everything the cartels were. We were trying to just be a pest to the cartels. Pull their dope off the streets when we can, stop their operations if we could. All of it, money, dope, and the way it progressed over the years. That team is just phenomenal. The amount of stuff they're getting into now compared to what we were doing. But even when we were there, I mean, it was just common to write, 2, 3 search warrants a week. The team functioned very well together. We did all our entries, were very smooth. And we'd have a debrief, and we were all, big boys. You put on your big boy pants, and, if you did something wrong in your debrief, you're going to hear it, and you should. And you correct otherwise. And it was a great team. A lot of fun, and we had a lot of support because the results were phenomenal. The amount of narcotics that we were bringing in and things that we were able to get involved in. And we would also support undercover operations that the feds were doing at the time, things like that. And then from there, I'd always wanted to get involved in the Outlaw Motorcycle Gangs, and had an interest in that, even from back before, even at Chula Vista. And so an opportunity arose where someone had asked me if I got shoulder tapped for it. So I went in there and started working the intel side of things. And that was, again, very enlightening. I was surprised at what I learned, surprised about the criminal activity the motorcycle gangs are into. It's quite unbelievable.
Was that your last assignment with that unit?
No, when I was there, that was going well. All the OMG stuff was going great. Also worked the white supremacist gangs and stuff like that with, I had a partner, he did the whites, I did the OMGs, and we worked together. We both had bikes, we both had vehicles, different things to go to different events with. And it was mainly just gathering intel, but we also worked with other states. I worked with people in other countries sometimes if needed. It was a great network of detectives that we all worked together on. There came a point where I'd been asked to go onto the marijuana team, which was part of the Narcotics Task Force. And initially my answer was no, I don't want to do that. But I'd been talked to by some people, and I realized it was probably the best decision to do at that time. And I'm glad I did. Again, got cross-sworn to DEA, learned a lot how the federal system works. I enjoyed that, a lot of helicopter stuff. That was a lot of fun, and the helicopters and the different things we got to do there. And that was that was another eye-opener. I learned a lot about human trafficking, about Chinese criminal enterprises operating in the U.S. that I didn't know about. And then the marijuana growing in the mountains and things like that by the cartels on our forest lands and things. And so it was rewarding trying to put an end to some of that stuff, because it's amazing how much they destroy the mountains and the forests and everything. So that was a great time. And then timing was right, and I tested for sergeant. It wasn't that difficult, and was able to, COVID hit, and I tested for sergeant, and then was offered a patrol team in my hometown. And so that's when I went back out of special investigations into patrol. Wow.
And only a short time in patrol though, right?
Yeah. We generally you do a year, and it's about what I did. We had a situation happen where I had to cover the detective sergeant spot for a bit. And then I went back to patrol for another couple months, and I think my year was up. And they had a team in that city that was called the Criminal Apprehension Team, and they primarily dealt with the gangs and the narcotics in that city, or kind of the outlying areas. But they did everything, theft rings, all that kind of stuff. These guys did everything, and just some of the sharpest detectives I'd ever worked with. Now I'm supervising them. And like patrol, they were teaching me how to do the job. I was like, what's a Snapchat warrant thing? How's that work? And what are these stay orders you guys are doing? They were just running circles around me, but it was a lot of fun because, we'd obviously done the old school type of stuff with all our warrants, and these guys had all the new ways of doing everything, and they're about the same age as my kids anyway. So really enjoyed working there, and that was my last assignment at the sheriff's.
So you were involved in a tremendous number of investigations, really, in many respects, tip of the sword out there on the street, and being very active in pursuing these offenders as well. Was there ever a case or an incident where you're like, man, I wish I could get that one back and get a do-over on that? Where you just, I could have done that better, or that just didn't go the way I wanted it to?
There's probably several of them. There was one where I found out I was sending somebody in to buy some narcotics out of a house, and he was offered a young girl, a couple of them actually, and you could hear it on the wire. And so we get back out, and I said, "What's going on in there?" And he said, "Well, these guys are moving bodies too, and they're working for the cartel on this side. They're moving bodies." And that's when he explained the whole thing to me. They basically pick up the people, they take their cell phones, they take them to a hotel, and then they demand more money from the families. At that time, $5,000-$6,000. But all the kids and the girls, especially, and the women would be forced into prostitution. And it's not something anybody wants to admit is happening, but it is happening. There's no question about it. And all of a sudden, the dope didn't really mean anything to me, and it really broke my heart. And California has some very stupid laws. They may have had some good intentions, but they're just absolutely ridiculous laws. And one of which precluded us from doing anything with immigration related as police officers sworn by the state. So because of our stupid laws, we create more victims, and we create a pathway for people to bring these victims through unharmed. There was nothing I could do. I turned it over to our federal partners, but quite frankly, they're so overwhelmed with so much else that nothing ever happened. And same thing happened on the marijuana task force. One of my places I'd written a warrant for, we weren't quite sure what we were going to get. I was thinking we might get, I don't know, 100 pounds of weed or something, maybe 1,000 pounds of weed. I didn't know. We hit this warehouse. We got truckloads and truckloads of weed. I mean, it was so much weed you couldn't believe it. But they had 7 women in there, held against their will, Chinese nationals. They were a little bit older, and they had to sit in this dark room and trim bud all day, and then work inside this warehouse. None of them spoke English, and we brought translators out, and they hated us, of course. But we brought the translators out, tried to help them and everything. And they wanted no help. They wanted nothing. There's nothing we can do. You can't prosecute them. You don't really even know who they are. There's no ID. And then another one we hit, the girls were actually in these, it was 6 foot by 6 foot sheds, wood shed, just plywood, but they had locks on them. So inside the shed was a tent, and that's where the 2 of the girls would stay. And then they had a makeshift kitchen, and this is all out in the wilderness. Had a makeshift kitchen, and then they would lock the girls in at night so they couldn't get away. And when we came in with helicopters and driving in and everything, and obviously all the girls run, and they run, they hide, and it just is what it is. They get away from you. We were able to get a lot of the cell phones, and going through the cell phones, I learned this network going all over our country, these Chinese women just being made slaves, and they have to work the marijuana fields. And it was sad. And shortly after that, there was we were right on the county line, and right over there, there were 7 Laotian women that were all shot in the head. And more than likely it was because the Chinese didn't want the Laotians coming into their drug areas. And, everybody wants to pretend none of this is happening, but I got photos. I mean, I saw it. Some of these people I even talked to. So in answer to your question, is the one that I wish I could go back and do over? Yeah, I don't know what I could do though, but it made me feel just kind of like, what good is getting dope when you got these lives that are being trafficked the way they are? And it was very sad. I think it still bothers me.
Is there someone that you look to as a mentor, or maybe didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, there's someone that really had an influence on your career in law enforcement?
There were several people. I had an FTO named Dan Hardman, true to his name. Kind of laughed at us for having automatics. He had a wheel gun. He was very proud of it. And there was an incident I did wrong. And this, in fact, I think I was in ghost phase at the time where he was just wearing civilian clothes. And I let somebody kind of front me off on a traffic stop on a motorcycle, and he took me around the corner and he gave me the what's up, and he told me up one side, down the other, and this isn't how cops are supposed to be, and he gave me that whole thing, and it was good because the academy was how to be the friendly, huggable type of cop, and so I realized this is a real game, and we don't just, it's not a game, it's a real thing. And Dan really kind of did the old scared straight with me, and I always looked up to him. He was a good guy, and ended up being a lieutenant at Chula Vista and then a chief of police in Wisconsin somewhere. Wow. And then at the sheriff's department, there was a guy who was a legend. His name's Kelly Moody, and he'd worked OMGs, and he's just same thing, man. Every time he gets out of the car, he had the big, huge wood and maple stick, and everybody else had their collapsible batons, but not Kelly. He gets out, he holsters that thing up, and when he was undercover, he had hair down to here and beard down to here type thing, and he was just, still is, and the guy's a legend, just a great leader, and pretty much anybody that works under him learns to love him, and he's shaped a lot of lives over there in San Diego. He's retired now, but just a great guy.
So you did a lot in 20 years. You did a lot in 20 years. You had some very unique experiences, but you can't help but bring some of those experiences home. And you talked about taking that drive with your wife after the one incident that you were involved in. What is the impact that you think that the job has had on your family?
I'm not sure that it had a negative impact on the kids. I think, if anything, it helped because I wasn't able to have my own company and I was able to be home more or be around more often. And so I think in that respect, it was good. And the sheriff's department was very good. My wife in 2013 found out she had breast cancer. And so she had to go through chemo and everything. And the department, I'd only been there a year, and they bent over backwards to make sure I could be there for anything she needed, any time off I needed. Again, San Diego Sheriff's Department was just, I couldn't ask for a better place to work. They were so good to us. And so I think because of that, that played out into our families even, making sure we had time with families, and they would do events, different things where you could involve your family if you wanted. But so I don't know that it affected the kids. I hope it didn't. But I think with my wife and our relationship, we've been married 34 years now. And I noticed that when I read about an officer being killed or something like that happens, there's a tremendous amount of anger that comes up that didn't used to be there. And I don't think I'm as patient as I should be. And sometimes it'll just create this anxiety, and I'll walk around with this anxiety or this anger. And I know my wife takes the brunt of that, and I feel really bad about that. But for the most part, I've tried to, she's been so supportive and so good about everything. Her and I can talk about anything. And so we have a good marriage. So that's probably, bringing it home is probably that, that side of things.
What are some of your best memories from the job?
The camaraderie. Again, back at the border crimes team, every team. The camaraderie was a lot of fun. During COVID, when somebody would retire, we'd sneak into a bar, and we know the owner, we'd get them to open it up, and we'd just have a big party, going away party for someone, and we're not supposed to be meeting. It was that kind of camaraderie. You're not going to let somebody retire and not have the party, those type of things. And then going back to patrol as a sergeant, my team was they were hard workers, and it was fun. I didn't realize mentoring young cops would be fun. I didn't think they needed anything from me, but I was able to mentor them. We do training Thursdays, and we worked every other Saturday, and when we'd work, we'd do a tri-tip barbecue for everyone, and I guess that tradition continued after I left for a while, and it was just a lot of fun. The team camaraderie. The last team I had, those guys cracked me up every time I'd go in there. I had a separate office, but every time I'd wander into their office, it was just, laughing and joking and everything. And the way they'd set things up in there was pretty funny. So I think all the team and camaraderie. It's like everywhere you went, you had community, tight community, people you die for. You can yell and scream at somebody one day, but the next day you're willing to die for them, you know, and that was just, you don't get that anywhere else.
When you look back at the job, do you have any regrets?
Yeah, I wish I'd fought the retirement. I wish I'd hired an attorney and fought that retirement. I would have liked to have not had that 10-year gap and seen where things would have gone at Chula Vista. And I think I could have been more mature back then, but, you know, I was working with the brain I had. You know? I wish I'd started sooner in law enforcement, and I wish I'd stayed longer. Those are my only regrets. I absolutely love the job.
So then that brings us to the retirement decision. How did that come about? Why did you decide to leave San Diego?
Well, I knew that we were, both my boys had gone off to college in Texas, and neither one of them were going to return to California. And retiring in California wasn't practical. I didn't see how that was really going to work out too well. And then our daughter was somewhat flexible. So my son, he and his wife got out of the military. They ended up out here in Chattanooga. And we loved it. We'd come out and visit. They had a little COVID baby. And so then they had another. So we were coming out and helping them and being around the kids. And one of the January of 23, we were out here, and just seeing how happy my wife was just, I'd never seen that type of joy. You know, her being around her grandkids, and just, she was so happy. And, you know, with all the kids out of town, it was kind of one of those things where, you know, what do you really live for? Mm-hmm. So I thought, this poor woman has had to deal with me my whole life. So, and all my careers and career changes and the craziness of things I've done. So it's the least we could do. So I put in for retirement. Didn't think it would be that bad. I actually thought, well, I'll just come out here and be a reserve somewhere, or get on with the local sheriff's department out here if need be. But so we ended up buying a house out here and retiring, and it was very shocking. Yeah, it was hard, very hard.
So explain.
Well, I wanted to leave, say, in 6 or 7 months. We put our house up for sale. It sold immediately, first week. The people needed to be in our house right away. So we had 21 years of stuff in that house that we're packing up and getting out of there and trying to put all that together. And then I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can we rent a house somewhere for a few months? What do we do with all our stuff? Nothing was working. There was no way for me to stay without sending her back here. And then that's not fair. I sent her back here alone to unpack everything. And for what? For a few more months, you know? And so I just, one day, my captain said, hey, I need you to make a decision because we got to replace your position, you know? And I said, all right, I'll leave on this date. And I just picked a date, the date we were closing escrow, and that was it. And it was, I think I was more shocked than anybody. Didn't even have time to do a retirement party, nothing, just, that was it.
So what's been the hardest part about being retired for you?
Just being out of that community. It was just dark. There were some dark days. It was very hard. I think a lot of the things some of the things I talked about here and other things that I've witnessed and dealt with, you know, it's, you know, I mean, we joke around, you know, like you'll see somebody lose their life over something or some situation, and you know, and kind of look at each other and, that was a hard way to go. Yeah. Hey, let's go get a beer. You know, I mean, that's just the way we deal with it, but that's important. You know, it's important to have those guys around, or gals, to where a year later, hey, you remember that particular case or something like that. Mm-hmm. You know, I had a deputy that used to work for me call me from an incident we were on, found out a year later that this particular baby had died, calls me up crying, you know. And you don't have those, you need that support. You know, you see a lot, you go through a lot, you screw up your brain a lot, you know, through all these memories, and it was hard being out here all alone. I left the community of our church, our CrossFit gym, my job, you know, 30 years of friends in the same town, you know, the whole thing. It was just kind of it was a lot more, you know, everybody pictures driving off into the sunset. Oh, I'm going to get a motorhome and go see the world and everything. That ain't me. Yeah, that was tough.
So what are you doing now?
Well, I tried to get a job, found out I was too old, and then got talking to a cop at church, and he says, oh, I got a friend who just took over the chief of police spot at University of Tennessee down there in Chattanooga. He said, you got to go talk to him. All right, so I went over there, set up a meeting, talked to him. This guy is just greatest. I mean, we hit it off right off the bat. We talked for, probably an hour and a half. And he says, what would you want to do here, you know? And I told him, I said, there's part-time investigations would be great. And he said, well, you got to go through the process. I said, that's fine. So I interviewed, and he called me up. We were actually in North Carolina helping out with the floods. So it was right around that time, and he called me up and he says, hey, he goes, I'd like to offer you a job, but it needs to be full-time. You know, you've got some experiences we'd like to utilize, and right now we're working some cases that we could use, you know, a little more help anyways. We have a lot of interviews to do on some cases that we're working, and we'd like you to come on full-time. And I said, all right, I'll call you back tomorrow. So I talked to my wife, and she agreed to it. So went on there full-time as a detective and get to wear this to work every day.
Wow.
And I work around, I mean, just phenomenal guys. You know, one of my lieutenants, retired chief of police in Colorado. My other lieutenant had been a lieutenant in Wisconsin, and he'd been down at Chattanooga PD for a while. He moved with his family. Just a great guy. And then my sergeant, he's a bit younger than me, but just tremendous amount of experience. He was a former SWAT guy and everything. And so, and then all the other people I've met so far are just phenomenal people. So it's, I can't believe they pay me to go there every day, but as long as they're going to keep paying me, I'm just going to keep going. But it's a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves.
That's awesome. So do you have any last words of advice, whether it's for someone that's coming on the job, someone who's maybe midway through it, someone who's looking to retire, or even somebody who's already retired?
Someone that's looking to get into the job, if that's in your heart and that's what you want to do, just do it, because you're never going to be happy anywhere else. It is the absolute greatest job in the world. You can do so many different things at that job. But if you're halfway into it and you're still, you know, pushing a sled around, taking reports and getting tired of working nights, keep doing it. Do it another 4 or 5 years if you have to, because eventually you get into investigations, you can get into all kinds of fun assignments after you do that. I can't speak to the management side of it because I never did that, never wanted to. But, you know, stick it out, keep pushing it through, keep a good attitude. I personally couldn't believe, once I lost the job and I got brought back onto the sheriff's department, every day I couldn't believe I got to go to work again. You know, it was that exciting for me. It was that fun. I mean, of course they had to pay me. I'm not going to do it for free, but absolutely love the job. And I think that kind of enthusiasm will just bring you wherever you want to go in the department. In terms of those retiring, I would say give yourself at least a year to prepare. There are some people that can walk away from the job and never look back. Good for you. I'd say the majority of the people I've talked to, it's not that easy. Find a soft landing somewhere, a good community. And if you got to move out of state and do everything like I did, be ready. It's not easy. So, but it's a great career. I wouldn't change one bit.
Ben, thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.